build more land. And they began expanding the very land mass of the Shawmut Peninsula out into the harbor through a process that we now call wharfing out. Now, the reason that we call this process wharfing out is because it would always begin by building 2 wharves from the mainland and out into the harbor. As we start to make our turn right now, you're going to see a little bit better what I'm talking about. Coming across our starboard side right now, you're going to see 2 wharves. You'll see Long Wharf, which we have just departed from. Then to its left is Central Wharf with the New England Aquarium sitting on it. And you'll notice in between them, there's a little space of water. That's the space of water that we just left from. So once the Puritans had 2 wharves like these side by side in the water, the next step for them would be to connect the wharves with a rock wall built in between them. You can imagine that if you did that here, it would sort of seal off part of that space of water. Well, that little space could then be drained of water and then filled back in with dirt from the hills of the peninsula, thereby creating a new spot of land to build on. Then they would just keep on doing that until the hills were gone and we had Boston as we know it today. In fact, today, 75% of all of the land in the city is man-made. If you look around yourselves right now in 360 degrees, every single piece of land that you can see at this time was not here back when Boston was first founded. It's all been wharfed out into the harbor, which you can probably imagine is a lot smaller today than it was back in 1630. So anywhere you see one of those rock walls along the water's edge, again, we call those rock retaining walls because they're holding back or retaining all that dirt that was pushed into the water. Anywhere you see one of those, you will know that you are looking at man-made land, and we'll be seeing plenty of them throughout the rest of our tour here today. But now that we've finished off our turn, you can look back off of the starboard side here and see these sailboats moored here in the water. On the other side of those sailboats, you'll see a rusted metal bridge with a gap in the middle of it. That bridge is called the Northern Avenue Bridge, and the gap is there because it's a turnstile bridge, which means that it can swivel open in the middle to let boats go through it. Well, as we pass by it right now, you're going to be able to look through the gap in that bridge and see on the other side of it Griffin's Wharf. Now, Griffin's Wharf is the site of one of the most famous events in all of American history. On December 16th, 1773, a group of American patriots loosely disguised as Native Americans and calling themselves the Sons of Liberty charged down Griffin's Wharf, crying out, "No taxation without representation." Well, they then proceeded to dump nearly 92,000 pounds of tea out of the holds of 3 Nantucket merchant ships called the Eleanor, the Dartmouth, and the Beaver, and into the harbor in order to protest the heavy taxes which had been levied on the colonies by King George III of England. Now, back in the day, they called that event the Boston Tea Action, but today we do, of course, refer to it as the slightly catchier Boston Tea Party. Well, to the left of the Northern Avenue Bridge now, you can see this big red brick building with the sloping green glass facade. That is the John Joseph Moakley Federal Courthouse. Now, the courthouse here was designed by the same man who designed the pyramid in front of the Louvre in Paris, France. That was a Chinese-American architect named I.M. Pei. And they say that I.M. Pei actually designed the facade of the courthouse here to look like a wave of justice overtaking the city of Boston. If you can see that, you have a better eye for art than I do. But it was at this courthouse here where the trial of infamous Boston gangster Whitey Bulger was held back in 2013. You may know him from the film Black Mass, starring Johnny Depp. Now, the courthouse here sits on top of Fan Pier, which was named for its shape. In fact, looking at it right now, you can see that Fan Pier does have that rock retaining wall running along the water's edge and fanning itself out and back towards the Northern Avenue Bridge. And again, that rock retaining wall does remind us that we are looking at man-made land. As a matter of fact, all the land that we're going to see off this side of the harbor was once part of Boston's South Bay. Now, today, the South Bay of Boston doesn't exist at all. It's now been wharfed out entirely into this neighborhood we're looking at here called South Boston, or Southie is its nickname. And what we're looking at here is a specific part of Southie called the Seaport District. This is the newest part of the city of Boston as a whole. You can see this big yacht tied up here. It just got in, actually, during our last tour. It's called the Excellence. It's an 80-meter long yacht, complete with a home cinema, a swimming pool, 7 cabins. Now, it can be yours. You can charter it out for the week. However, the best price you're going to get for it per week is about $1.1 million. Again, behind it there, we are looking into the Seaport District, the newest part of the city of Boston. as a whole. There's been a huge amount of construction and development going on here in recent years. I can actually show you exactly how much. So I'll point out to you this tall building that says Goodwin up at the very top of it. Just in front of it, though, there's a building that we're going to be focusing more on. It's that low sort of cube-shaped glass building there, which is called the ICA. Now, the ICA stands for the Institute of Contemporary Art. It's a little museum which was built on the spot in 2006. Now, to prove to you the Seaport District here is popping up, I'll tell you that when the ICA was first built there in 2006, it was actually the tallest building in the district. So you can see exactly how many other buildings have gone up here in the past 14 years. Now today, the ICA is the second most visited museum in Boston. It's second only to the Museum of Fine Arts or the MFA over in the Fenway area on Huntington Avenue. Well, coming up next here, we have this low tan building with the flag poles up on top of it. This is the World Trade Center here in Boston. Now, it sits on top of Commonwealth Pier. Commonwealth Pier here was built back in 1912, originally to serve as the tie-up pier for transatlantic passenger steamers like the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth, both of which have tied up there back during the heyday of the transatlantic ocean liner. Now, those ships were sort of like the cruise ships at that point in time, but today's cruise ships will never tie up a dock here at Commonwealth Pier just because they're built way too big to come this far into the inner harbor. Instead, they tie up further down in South Boston than we will get to today, over at a spot called the Black Falcon Cruise Ship Terminal. To the left of Commonwealth Pier, though, we do have the South Boston Fish Pier, built in 1914. This is the oldest continuously used fishing pier in the entire country, and today it is home to one of the largest fishing fleets on the eastern seaboard. You can see just a couple of those fishing vessels tied up alongside the pier there. These are called stern draggers. They're called this because they cast nets from their sterns and then they drag them along to catch their fish. Now, they do all that fishing almost 150 miles offshore out at a spot called George's Bank. George's Bank is one of the richest fishing banks in the entire world. So they do their fishing out there. Then they return right back here to the fish pier where these catches get weighed, processed, and then distributed throughout New England and the rest of the world. To the left of the fish pier now, too, you can see this big white tent. Now, this is the Rocklin Trust Bank Pavilion. It's a concert venue. Typically in the summer here, it hosts a big summer concert series which welcomes many big-name artists like Beck and Bob Dylan, both of whom have played there in recent summers past. Now, obviously, this summer there's not a whole lot of music going on there, but even with that, it's still a nice sight to see because at night they will light up the top of the tent there with red, yellow, and orange spotlights. So even with no sounds, it's still a nice sight to see if you're out here on the water at night. So we're looking at the back of the pavilion right now. We're passing behind it. As we do, you'll see right in between it and us something called a dry dock. Now, a dry dock is a way of performing repairs on a ship. You can see there's this big metal gate that says General Ship on the very top of it there. Now, behind they didn't stick it up there just to look at it. It also serves a very important purpose because at night that fish's eyeball can light up different colors in order to indicate the speed of the wind out here in the harbor. Now, if you look below the Legal Seafood Center there, you can see that there is this rock retaining wall still running along the water's edge, reminding us that although we've left all that brand new construction and development of the Seaport District earlier in the tour behind us, we are still looking at South Boston here, still looking at man-made land. And again, the rock retaining wall is proof of that. If you follow that wall away from us too, it is going to lead you towards the outer harbor there. You may have noticed that we are starting to peel away from South Boston, heading over towards the other side of the harbor. As we make this turn, you will get a great view out into Boston's beautiful outer harbor there. You'll be able to make out just some of the 34 islands which make up the Boston Harbor Islands National Park. The big one on the right, closest to South Boston there with the rocks along its shoreline, is called Spectacle Island. It's a great big park. It's a great spot for hiking, fishing, and swimming. You can actually take a ferry out there from the other side of Long Wharf than the side we started on. To the left of Spectacle Island there too, you can see a very long island called Long Island. It's got that red and white checkerboard water tower sticking up off the top of it. A little bit hard to see from this distance, but around that water tower there's a bunch of red brick buildings. And the buildings there on Long Island were built back in 1882, originally to serve as a plague hospital and insane asylum. And it is this island here which served as the inspiration for the book which later became the movie Shutter Island. So, a little bit of a famous island out there. As we start to come across the harbor here completely, again, we've said goodbye to South Boston. We're going to say hello to East Boston in just a moment here. Well, as we come up along the side of East Boston, you can see that although we are looking at a new neighborhood, we still have a familiar sight. Just like in South Boston, there is still another very long rock retaining wall running along the water's edge on this side of the harbor too. Now, this one marks the very edge of, as you may have just noticed, Boston's Logan Airport. And it reminds us the airport itself sits on top of 2,400 acres of man-made land. Now, it all encompasses the space around what used to be 3 islands here in the harbor called Bird Island, Apple Island, and Governor's Island. The airport here was named after a war hero from the Spanish-American War. That was a General Edward Lawrence Logan. It opened up back in 1923, and since that time it has become the 16th busiest airport in the nation, as well as the busiest transportation hub in New England. As a matter of fact, it does see one flight land or take off here just about every single minute. Which sounds like a great deal of money, and it is. But it does seem a little bit smaller when you consider the fact that with some fishing that is still going on to this very day. The Big Dig is now committed a whopping $22.2 million. Here we're taking the 2 major highways which ran through Boston, I-99 and 3, and then reinstalling them in tunnels passing below the city to try and solve some of the traffic problems that the city was. And unfortunately still is having today. We're back off the starboard side now. Here you can see we're by the Hyatt Regency Hotel. It's this red brick building with an interesting glass structure built onto its right side there. Now, if you thought this was a lighthouse, I'm trying to say they would be wrong, but you would be forgiven. It was actually built to replicate Sanctity Head Light of Nantucket. It was playing homage to the hundreds of lighthouses up and down the coast of New England. In reality, though, that is just the buildings. Look at the shaft. But designed it like the idea of it looking like a lighthouse just so very much. They did actually install a beacon up at the very top of it, this big bright light which could shine out to sea. But that was a nice idea, and it did help it look more like a lighthouse. Unfortunately, though, it helped so much, this fake lighthouse began to confuse real ship captains passing by Boston. But very, very firmly to dim that light. And now it is after everything. To the left of the hotel there, so you can see the Captain Thomas Cove here along the East Boston shoreline. Now, it's in this cove where the old Immigration Hall of Boston was once located. Now, during the 1800s, Boston saw a wave after wave of immigrants coming into the city, especially during the 1840s, when many Irish immigrants were coming to Boston to escape the Irish potato famine, which was ravaging Ireland at the time. So, it was right here in this cove where these immigrants would be processed before being sent down along the length of Marginal Street in the direction that we're heading now. At the end of Marginal Street, you'll then turn right and go up a set of stairs called the Golden Stairs. Now, the Golden was a land opportunity. Now, that being said, no one's going up those Golden Stairs. They quickly turn left and cross down to the East Boston Penny Ferry landing, where they take the ferry from here in East Boston across the harbor to South Boston to look for work. Now, once getting into South Boston, though, despite having just entered the so-called land of golden opportunity, these Irish need apply. They faced a great deal of persecution in their first years in this country as they were the religious minority, but despite that fact today, South Boston is still the second highest concentration of Irish people in the entire world, and second only, well, to Ireland itself. Well, coming up next here off the starboard side, we have a very interesting vessel, this red one that says Nantucket along its hull. It's got these 2 yellow masts too, and if you look at the tops of them, you're going to get a clue as to this vessel's original purpose. This boat is called LV-112, or Light Vessel 112. It's one of 3 Nantucket light ships, which were basically floating lighthouses, which would have been stationed off the coast of the island of Nantucket in order to guide other ships around the dangerous, shallow waters which surround the island for 40 miles. Now, the sailors who worked on board these boats would work for 3 weeks at a time. 3 weeks on, then 3 weeks off. Now, you can probably imagine that if you had to work on board a boat that was going literally nowhere, 40 miles away from anywhere, for 3 weeks, you'd probably end up with a good amount of free time on your hands. And those sailors certainly did. So in order to pass that time, they developed a very interesting hobby, which was basket weaving. They started weaving these little baskets called Nantucket lightship baskets, which they are very highly sought after by collectors. As a matter of fact, just a few months ago, an original Nantucket lightship basket about the size of two of your fists put together, a basket of that size sold at auction for $35,000. So you might want to start learning how to weave. Off the starboard side now, though, you can see that we've sort of come past this marina and the shipyard here, coming up to another section of the East Boston waterfront. This one is covered in trees, as you can see. We're looking at a park here. This park is called Piers Park. Now, Piers Park also sits on this wharf, stretching towards us here. You can see the wharf is capped off by that green sort of spaceship-like monument there. And that monument is one of three in the harbor dedicated to master shipbuilder Donald Mackay, a very important man in Boston maritime history. I'll tell you a little bit more about him once we get up towards the end of East Boston here. But if you were listening to me carefully, you may have heard me just say that Piers Park sits on a wharf and not a pier. Well, it was actually misnamed. It was named Piers Park. Remember, many bustling piers once occupied this entire section of the East Boston waterfront. Although the park itself does actually sit on a wharf. What is the difference between a wharf and a pier? I can't tell you that is up a dock here. And this is not a ship used for shipping. As a matter of fact, this is not a ship used for anything right now. This ship is called the Caledonia. It was purchased a couple of years back. Currently it's here, tied up, and having work done on it. It's in the process of being refurbished and converted into restaurants. So we have a very good restaurant right here on this spot. You can see the spot in the water with a big floating dock with concrete blocks on it. Now, this whole section doesn't look like too much, today at least, but it's actually the former site of the East Boston Penny Ferry landing, which was the longest running penny ferry in the nation. Now, it ran from 1632 all the way until 1952. That is 320 years of those ferries running at just 1 cent, or I should say almost all that time actually, because at one point the owners did try and raise the fare from 1 penny all the way up to one outrageous nickel. I know, how dare they? But Bostonians did what we do best and rebelled against the tyranny of that 4-cent increase, and soon the fares dropped back down to 1 cent once again. Now to the left of the old landing here, you can see we're passing by this construction site. They're building these condominiums here at, as the banner says, Clipper Ship Wharf. Now, if there had always been condos here, they probably wouldn't call it Clipper Ship Wharf. They'd probably call it Condominium Wharf, which tells us that before there were condominiums here, there were clipper ships here at Clipper Ship Wharf. Now, what we're looking at here is the former site of the shipyard of master shipbuilder Donald Mackay, who I did mention to you back down at Piers Park. Now, Donald Mackay was famous for having built these clipper ships. Clipper ships were the fastest ships on the seas. Some of them called the Greyhounds of the sea due to their speed. And his were the fastest of them all. Now, his most famous clipper ship was called the Flying Cloud. The Flying Cloud was built in 1851, but in 1854 the Flying Cloud made one more voyage. Now, on its very first try, the Flying Cloud left New York and went down along the east coast of North America. Now, this was way before the Panama Canal was ever constructed. They continued down along the east coast of South America, around on the Horn of South America, and then worked their way back up the west coasts to San Francisco. So New York all the way down and around to San Francisco, and it made this voyage in a record-setting 89 days and 8 hours. And that may not sound like impressive in this case, does still hold on to that record. At this point in time, though, we are starting to come towards the very end of East Boston here. You look just to the left of this stretch of land here, you can see the mouth of His official name is Fenway Green. That is the exact color of the green monster over at Fenway Park, home, of course, to the Boston Red Sox. Now, there's a lot of Fenway Green to look at up there because the Mystic Tobin Bridge is a very, very long bridge. Now, at 2.5 miles in length, it is actually 1/2 mile longer than the Golden Gate Bridge. However, the main difference between these two bridges is that much of what the Mystic Tobin Bridge here crosses is actually land. It does span the majority of Charlestown to its left, meaning that it is just a little bit less famous, a little bit less iconic, if you will, than its West Coast cousin. Now, speaking of Charlestown, we are now approaching what used to be the Charlestown Navy Yard, which was, up until it was shut down in 1972, the second largest and the second busiest Navy Yard in the country, second only to the one in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. At its peak here in Charlestown, they managed to turn out one ship every single month. If it was so productive, you may be wondering why then it was shut down at all. Well, it was shut down in 1972, which was a re-election year for Richard Nixon. Now, during that election, every single state in the Union voted for Nixon. Almost. The only one that did not was right here in Massachusetts. So in a little bit of retribution, the Navy Yard here was shut down. Since that time, about 75% of it has been sold off to developers and converted into real estate, or residential space rather, industrial space and commercial space. About 25% of it, though, was kept around to serve as a museum and a historical site. And it is that 25% that we are headed in towards right now. Well, as we do make our way in towards that last little bit of the Navy Yard here, you can look up off our starboard bow here and see this tall stone monument rising into the sky. Some of you may not be able to see it just yet, depending on where you're sitting, but it's going to come across our starboard side right now. This is the Bunker Hill Monument. It was built to commemorate the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, the Battle of Bunker Hill was fought on June 17th, 1775, but if you know anything about the Battle of Bunker Hill, you may know that it was not actually fought on Bunker Hill. It was fought on Breed's Hill, where the monument stands today. Now, to be honest, we're not quite sure where that mix-up came from. The best historical guess is simply that these soldiers were not trained in the fine art of reading. They couldn't read the maps, just saw the bigger hill there, Breed's Hill, and decided they should defend that one for strategic advantage. What we do know, though, is that during this battle, the colonists fought to a near standstill against them. Now in the water off our starboard side, you can see this big gray warship, USS Cassin-Young. Now, she is a World War II Fletcher-class destroyer, most famous for being the last vessel to have been hit by a kamikaze pilot during the Battle of Okinawa. Now, the pilot struck the ship's starboard side here, managing to get his plane all the way down to the engine room, unfortunately killing 22 sailors, but not managing to sink the ship, which was repaired, decommissioned, now stands here as a floating museum and a monument to all the ships built and repaired here at the Charlestown Navy Yard. To the left of the Cassin-Young, you will get a great view of the pride and joy of the harbor, the jewel of the Navy Yard, if you will, the one and the only, the USS Constitution. Now, she is the oldest commissioned warship still afloat in the entire world. Built and launched right here in Boston Harbor on October 21st, 1797. Now, she never lost one of her 33 battles. Well, she first saw combat all the way back in 1803, not fighting anywhere near here, though. She was off the coast of Africa in the Mediterranean Sea, where she was fighting against the Barbary pirates. Now, 9 years later, on August 19th, 1812, off the coast of Nova Scotia, she was in a different battle in which she earned her famous nickname. Now, on this day, she was fighting a ship called the HMS Guerriere. During the battle, the Guerriere's cannonballs here were seen bouncing right off the sides of the Constitution's hull, prompting one particularly excitable sailor to exclaim, "Huzzah! Her sides are made of iron." Now, her sides are not actually made out of iron, they're made out of 22-inch thick planks of Georgia live oak, but that is where she gets her nickname, Old Iron Sides. Now, as we start to make a turn away from her, you may get a chance to see the Bunker Hill Monument lining up with her rigging, a beautiful sort of quintessentially Bostonian site, a site which sums up a lot of our city's history, a site which sums up a lot of our country's history too, and a site which they liked so much they decided the city needed some more of it. You'll see what I'm talking about as we finish our turn away from the ship. Coming across our starboard side right now here, you can see this big white table-stained bridge. That is the Leonard P. Zakim Bunker Hill Memorial Bridge, and it was actually designed specifically to look like the Bunker Hill Monument when viewed through the rigging of the USS Constitution. Now, the bridge here spans the mouth of the Charles River, which is sometimes called the smartest river in Massachusetts, as many colleges and universities do sit along its banks, including BU, MIT, and Harvard. Now, just to the left of the bridge there is TD Garden, home to our beloved Boston Bruins and Boston Celtics. If you went right through the garden at this angle and kept on going straight for another 2 miles or so, you'd eventually run into the famous Fenway Park, built in 1912 and again home to the Boston Red Sox. Well, at this point, we are starting to finish our turn away from the bridge. We're getting ready to head back down towards the Long Wharf once again to finish off the tour. Now, as we do come across our starboard side and all the way back along Wharf off our starboard side, we'll be looking at the historic North End. One last neighborhood of Boston we'll check out here. And the North End today is Boston's Italian neighborhood. It's also the oldest residential neighborhood in the entire country. Now, rising into the sky from above the roofs of the North End there, too, you can see that tall white steeple. That is the steeple of the Old North Church. Now, on the night of April 18th, 1775, the sexton of that church, Robert Newman, hung 2 lanterns in that steeple, 1 if by land and 2 if by sea. And that was in order to signal to the midnight riders the British had left occupied Boston by sea and were heading towards Lexington and Concord to capture guns, ammunition, and revolution leaders. Now, the very next morning, April 19th, 1775, would be the Battle of Lexington and Concord. That would be the very first battle of the Revolutionary War. And there are many misconceptions surrounding the night of those midnight rides. For instance, many people have heard of the famous midnight ride of Paul Revere. I believe that Paul Revere was the only midnight rider out there. He was actually one of several, but the 2 most famous were himself and another man named William Dawes. Also, many people believe that they would have been riding throughout the countryside, shouting out, "The British are coming!" Coast Guard, or some of the Coast Guard's work boats. The one on the right there is a tugboat. The one on the left is a buoy tender, which does maintenance work on the red and green navigation buoys in the area. The orange and gray boats here are the Coast Guard's patrol boats. This white-hulled vessel, the Seneca, it's called cutter. Cutters are search and rescue vessels in case of an emergency, including, as you'll see on the Seneca here, a helicopter landing pad and hangar. And the Coast Guard also has red-hulled vessels, but you're definitely not going to see one of those here today. As a matter of fact, we hope never to see one of those red-hulled vessels in the harbor at all, as these red-hulled Coast Guard vessels are icebreakers, and seeing one here means the harbor has completely frozen over, something that it has not done since 1904. Nonetheless, the Coast Guard's motto is Semper Paratus, Latin for always ready. To the left of the Coast Guard base now, you can see we're coming up towards the orange and gray apartment complex we sit on top of Battery Wharf. Now, Battery Wharf is most famous for being the launching point of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. Any Civil War buffs here know the 54th Massachusetts has been the first all-African-American regiment to fight in the American Civil War. Any film buffs here know the movie Glory, starring Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman, was inspired by the actions of those soldiers. There's also a monument to the 54th, which stands just across from the Massachusetts State House on the Boston Common. To the left of Battery Wharf is Burroughs Wharf, home to the Boston Harbour branch of the fire department. This red-hulled firefighting vessel, you can see kind of the dock there, is called the John S. Damrell, named after the hero fire chief who was serving during the Great Fire of 1872, when 2/3 of the city's financial district burned right to the ground. Now, interestingly enough, they actually took all the rubble from that fire and reused it as landfill during the wharfing out of Boston, meaning that it all became part of the city once again. Now, the Great Fire of 1872 is not the only disaster that Boston has seen in its time here, not at all. There was nothing much happened here in the North End back in the early 1900s. This is probably the strangest disaster that any city could ever see. Now, back in the early 1900s, there was a distillery here in the North End. They were making rum. Specifically, they're making rum. Now, in order to make rum, you need to have molasses. In order to make a lot of rum, you need to have a lot of molasses. So back in the early 1900s, there were huge tanks of molasses scattered around the North End here. Well, on January 15th, 1919, it was an unseasonably warm winter's day here in Boston. So warm, as a matter of fact, that one of these tanks of molasses began to heat up. As a result of this unexpected heat, the molasses inside the tank began to expand. Well, it stayed warm throughout the day, and the molasses continued to expand throughout the day, expanding beyond the capacity of the tank, causing it to explode. Now, this explosion sent 2.4 million gallons of molasses rushing down Commercial Street in the North End in a 17-foot-tall wave that moved at 35 miles an hour. This huge wave of molasses actually drowned 21 people, collapsed a series of buildings, buckled an elevated subway track, and even sank boats out of a dock here in the harbor. It took the city of Boston 6 years to clean up the mess. Today it's referred to as the Great Molasses Flood of 1919, and to this day, there are people who swear that in the hot summer days you can still catch a whiff of molasses all around Commercial Street. Well, looking up into the skyline of Boston right now, you can get a great view of the city. You can also see one building up there that does not look quite like the rest of them. I'm talking about that tall, thin clock tower with the pyramid up on top. That is the Custom House Tower, completed in 1914 to become the city's very first modern skyscraper. Now, when the tower was first built, there was one central mechanism which controlled all four of the clocks up top, but when an elevator shaft was later added, they had to give each clock face its own mechanism, which means that today, no two of those four clocks are going to tell you the same or even the correct time. And on very, very windy days, you can actually watch time speed up, slow down, or go in reverse up there, leading to many Bostonians to call it the four-faced liar. Well, just below and to the right of the four-faced liar now, you can see the green trees of Columbus Park. Sticking out from the tops of them is the gold dome of Faneuil Hall, which was built in 1742 and it's frequently called the Cradle of Liberty, as the founding fathers often lived there in secret while planning the Revolution. In front of it is the green copper dome of Quincy Market, built later on in the 1820s to serve as the country's first market complex. Today, it's home to many great shops, restaurants, street vendors, and street performers, and welcomes over 18 million visitors every single year. To the left of those two domes, you can see we are coming back to Long Wharf once again. As we do, I want to point out to you this white T-shaped flagpole that sits at the end of the wharf. Keep your eyes on that flagpole, because as we go past it, it's going to line up along the length of Long Wharf and up the street behind it and into the city. And it's going to intersect with a little building in the middle of the road about a third of a mile away from us into Boston. The building you're looking for is a little red brick building with a white steeple and a gold dome on top of it. It's called the Old State House. And the Old State House was built back in 1713, and the reason that I'm trying so hard to point it out to all of you is because it actually marks the original strip line of Boston. So as we go past and it starts to line up, there it is just now for me. What you're seeing there is the original length of Long Wharf, as well as seeing just how much of the city really does sit on man-made land. It is pretty amazing to see when it's all lined up in front of you like that. Now, the Boston Massacre occurred directly in front of the Old State House on March 5th. 1770. This was a tragic misunderstanding which occurred when a riot going on in front of the State House turned sour. Now, American patriots were rioting against the British redcoats standing on guard there. As the two crowds grew larger and larger and louder and louder, in the middle of all that confusion, a shout was misheard by the British redcoats as an order to open fire into the crowd of civilians, which they did, killing 5 and injuring 6 others. One of the most important events which led to the explosion of the American Revolution just over 5 years later. On the morning of April 19th, 1775, on the battlegrounds of Lexington and Concord, something that's called the Shot heard around the world. I also see some of you have noticed this big car carrier that's passing us off our stern here. So it's just come down the mouth of the Mystic River here. It's all loaded up with cars, and it's heading out in the outer harbor. So folks, with that, we are going to be heading back into dock at Long Wharf once again. So right now I'd like to give a big shout out to Captain Shane and the crew for getting us in and out safely on time. So thank you to them. A big thank you to all of you as well for coming on with us here today. I think that this is the best way to see the sights of Boston. Beautiful views, beautiful weather, and of course, most importantly, absolutely no traffic. So, thanks for coming out with us here today. Again, my name is Nate. I have been your narrator. I do sincerely hope you've enjoyed the time with us here today. Now, if you have, I'd like to show your appreciation. I will be right down at the gangway just to take this with us. And so, on behalf of Boston Harbour Cruise, I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your time here in Boston, and thank you all once more so very, very much. right, folks, you're all set to use those stairs and disembark to the vessel. When you get off the gangway, you're going to take a right and head down to gate 3. Thanks so much for coming out with us here today. Watch your step and your head while you're on the gangway, and have a great rest of your afternoon.